I have been, I guess, motivated in education initiatives by really two conversations I had prior to even coming in, or one prior to coming into office, one after. I was a wannabe governor at the time. It was about a year before the election, and I was talking to several people who had been highly engaged in education efforts in Tennessee and in other places. I ended up in an interesting conversation. And one of the people in the conversation said, well, the next governor's job is going to come down to standing in the doorway and making certain that we don't retreat. I said, well, that doesn't sound like a real interesting or inciting idea for a reason to want to be a governor. What do you mean? They said, well, Tennessee at that point in time had just won the race to or was in the process of winning the race to the top funding, and Tennessee won $500 million. Tennessee also had put some new standards in place called the Tennessee Diploma Project for both standards and achievement and for what was required for graduation. And Tennessee had just passed a new evaluation process as part of the race to the top funding. And the person I was talking to said, well, the next governor is going to live with the rebound that comes with any changes. When you make any changes, initially people might get sold on the idea, but then after it's implemented, there is inevitably a pushback. And the next governor's primary job is going to be to stand in the doorway as people start to say this is too painful or it's too hard. This past legislative session, we've had a huge battle over the whole issue of implementing Common Core in our schools. We're in our third year of implementation. We've trained about 40,000 teachers, and as you can imagine, it's as you've read in other places in the country, it's been just as contentious, or not, if not more, here. But I honestly thought it was incredibly important that we not back up on those standards for this reason. About 6 years ago, Tennessee got an F- for truth in advertising when it came to describing proficiency for our students. In other words, we were telling our parents that our students were doing a lot better than they were. And you say, well, give me an example. We were saying that 90% of our kids were proficient at grade level. 90% were proficient at grade level. But when they got to college, 70% of them needed remedial work. Well, something's not right in one of those numbers, right? If we're saying 90% are proficient, but 70% need remedial work when they get to college, something is not right. And so the process was begun of raising the standards. Again, it began before I got there, but I thought it was so important. The basketball analogy that I give is this. If you're not a basketball fan, basketball goals are at 10 feet. But I said, it's like we put the goals at 6 feet, and then we told their parents that all your kids can dunk. It's amazing. Well, all of our kids couldn't dunk. And so we did a lot better job of redescribing proficiency and where we stood. And with that, I think we've seen that we're a state that has come too far to back up or to settle for less.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've navigated some of the growing political backlash to reforms, especially with the Common Core, and what you think of some of that backlash that we've been seeing, particularly within the Republican Party. Sure.
And so those of you who didn't know, I am a Republican governor, and there are a whole lot of folks in our party, actually in both parties, but in our parties who have pushed back really hard against Common Core. We've worked really hard to define what it is and what it's not. It's not curriculum design, that's still local school board. It's not textbook selection, that's still local school boards with the State Board of Education. What it is a group of states who came together and defined what every child should know at that point in his or her education career. And so we've worked really hard to do that, not with total success. This year, there was a lot of pushback against Common Core. What we came out of the session with this year was an agreement to delay the implementation of PARC. PARC is one of the assessments associated with Common Core. And we were scheduled to go live with using PARC in next academic year. So a year from now, we'd be using the PARC assessment vehicle. There was an agreement made to delay that for a year and to do an RFP for a new assessment to see if that was the proper tool. While I didn't like that, I think it was, in my mind, much more to be preferred than backing up on the standards being implemented in our classrooms. I really do think we're making historic progress. And if you go talk to the vast majority of our teachers, they would tell you the same thing. That teaching Common Core standards is really just good teaching about learning how to think and learning what every child should know. So It is, the interesting thing about education battles is sometimes a lot of battles turn into left versus right type things along the political spectrum. It doesn't always work that way in education. In Common Core, you're battling folks on the right who are positive that this is, you know, something that the Obama administration is forcing on all Americans, and folks on the left who don't like the fact that ultimately, you know, results are going to be tied to evaluations and are trying to sever that connection. So we've had some, I think it might be one of the more interesting political battles we've been in the whole time because of that interesting combination of left and right coming together against something. Yes?
Tony Kahns with the Courier-Journal up in Louisville. I'm just wondering, Kentucky and Tennessee are very similar in terms of, you know, race to the top and everything like that.
Right.
What do you say to your critics or those that say states that sign up for all of these things are doing it just for the money and, you know, making a deal with the quote-unquote devil, with the federal government to give out this money, and you're tied to certain standards because of that?
You know, ultimately, I think governors are about solving problems. It's one of the great things about this job versus being in Congress. There's a whole lot of things better about this job than being in Congress. But one of those is, ultimately, we should be judged on results. Tennessee basically applied for Race to the Top and won it before I was in office, but I came out, and actually everybody who was running for governor at the time, Republican and Democrat, came out in favor of it. But I would argue that agreeing to those higher standards has resulted in better outcomes, which I think means more opportunity for everyone. And I think to people who ask me that as a Republican, well, you know, this sounds like stuff coming from the national level. I'd say, well, A, it was voluntary. B, the higher standards have produced better results, which I think will provide more opportunity. And as a Republican, ultimately, if we can't argue that we're about providing better opportunity, then we don't really have an argument.